What's up, TMB Youth Group? Miss seeing you guys. I really do miss just getting to be in person with you guys and getting to have fun together. And so I look forward to that day when we're going to get to be together again. But in the meantime, I hope that you are encouraged by watching these messages, and I invite you every time during these messages, but I want to say it again. Please come to our Zoom hangout tonight. It's at 7:30 on Sunday nights, and so we'll have one tonight. I'll be sending out the links later today, so please participate in that. I think it's such an encouragement to me and to each one of us to somewhat get to be together, even if it's just virtually. So that's tonight at 7:30. Please be a part of that. And on the Zoom call tonight, I'm going to give an important announcement about our summer camps that we go to, about Cornerstone and Zenith. And that's something I'd like to, even though we can't be in person, I'd like to give that announcement when I can see your faces and we can have a conversation. So please be on at 7:30 tonight. It's a chance that we can play games together, get to talk together, and also pray for one another. Well, right now in our world, there is a lot of fear, and understandably so. This health crisis that's affected our world, there's a lot of scary things about this. It has interrupted our lives, and so there's a lot of us just walking around with a little more fear and a little more anxiety these days. Well, fear, it's kind of a funny thing. Sometimes it can come out of our lives in ugly ways. Sometimes when we're dealing with fear or anxiety, sometimes it spills out and it comes out as anger. Sometimes it can cause us to be really impatient with others. A lot of times fear doesn't really produce compassion for others, but a lot of times it makes us more selfish. So fear sometimes can spill out of our lives in some ugly ways. And I think you can relate with this. You could just get on social media and scroll through right now, and you can see just fear at work in people's lives, that sometimes it comes out in really hateful or ugly ways, when really at the root of what's going on with that person is they're just scared or they're just anxious right now. And I think we see it in ourselves too. I think we've had different times when we've been really fearful or really anxious, and sometimes it caused us to lash out on people we love, or to be impatient with people or short with people. And so fear sometimes just comes out in really ugly ways. That fear doesn't always lead to the kind of godly, Christ-like character that we want to have. We're going to continue our Old Testament series that we've been going through on Sunday mornings. The series is entitled Character, and so we're looking at some of the major characters in the Old Testament story and how God used that person, and ultimately we're looking at what does that person's story reveal about the character of God. So what can we learn about who he is and what he cares about, and what his plan for you and me and for this world is. So we're going to continue that series. So we've been going through, last week we looked at Samuel, and the week before, or a couple weeks before, we looked at his mom Hannah. But during this time, Israel has really been struggling, and they've been struggling for a while, all through the time of the judges and even before that. But they've been struggling to really trust in God. They've been struggling as a nation. There's been lots of different enemies that they've been dealing with that have made life hard for them, and they're kind of a very divided nation. They're not very united at this point. And Israel, the people of Israel, thinks that they know the solution to their problem. They think that if they could just have a king that would lead them, then they could be like every other nation, and that would give them success. That would unite them as a nation, and that would give them success over their enemies. And they think that a human king, a person over them, was the solution. And so they went to Samuel, and we talked about this last week in Samuel's story, that God is using Samuel as kind of this leader of Israel, and a prophet, his spokesperson that delivers his message to Israel, and he also serves as a priest. But they go to Samuel, and they say, put a king over us. And Samuel talks to God about this, And God ultimately, even though he knows that this isn't the solution of what's going to make them successful as a nation, God says, give them what they want. And so Samuel anoints a man that God chooses to be their first king. And if you know the story of Israel, you know the first king is Saul. And Saul, he's someone who definitely looks the part. It says he was taller than everyone else, that he was handsome. And that's kind of what the people wanted. They wanted a king that looked like all the other kings the other nations have, someone that looked impressive, someone that looked the part. And Saul, early on in his kingship, he does some good things. We see him display some humility, and we see him even kind of rally the people of Israel to help rescue this one Israelite city that had been oppressed by their enemies. And so he does some good things early on. But as his story continues, he really struggles to be the kind of king that God would want over his people. And so I want to look at one story today where he is getting ready to lead Israel's army into a battle against the Philistines. And the Philistines were a powerful army. It was a formidable enemy to go against. And so this is an important moment for Saul of how does he handle this moment as he faces this really tough enemy. Is he willing to trust God in this moment, or does he do things his own way? So let's read in 1 Samuel chapter 13, verses 5 through 15. The Philistines assembled to fight Israel with 3,000 chariots, 6,000 charioteers, and soldiers as numerous as the sand on the seashore. They went up and camped at Michmash, east of Bethaven. When the men of Israel saw that their situation was critical and that their army was hard-pressed, they hid in caves and thickets among the rocks and in pits and cisterns. Some Hebrews even crossed the Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. Saul remained at Gilgal, and all the troops with him were quaking with fear. He waited 7 days, the time set by Samuel, but Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and Saul's men began to scatter. So he said, "Bring me the burnt offering and the fellowship offerings." And Saul offered up the burnt offering. Just as he finished making the offering, Samuel arrived, and Saul went out to greet him. "What have you done?" asked Samuel. Saul replied, "When I saw that the men were scattering and that the Philistines were assembling at Michmash, I thought, now the Philistines will come down against me at Gilgal, and I have not sought the Lord's favor. So I felt compelled to offer the burnt offering." "You acted foolishly," Samuel said. "You have not kept the command the Lord your God gave you. If you had, he would have established your kingdom over Israel for all time. But now your kingdom will not endure. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart and appointed him leader of his people, because you have not kept the Lord's command." All right, so it talks about this Philistine army that the Israelites are facing, and it talks about how they're much more numerous. It talks about them being as many as the sand on the seashore, and they have these chariots and charioteers, so they are a more powerful army. They have more people. And so at this point, Israel's army and Saul are scared. It talks about they're hiding, that some of them have ran away or scattered, and it describes them as quaking with fear. And Saul is waiting on Samuel because before they go into battle, Samuel, as a priest, is going to offer a burnt offering to God to make sure that they seek God's favor before they go into battle. And so that was Samuel's role as priest. But Saul, as he's fearful and he sees his army start to scatter, he grows impatient. And Samuel's taking longer than he would hope. And so he just goes ahead and he offers the burnt offering himself. Samuel arrives right at that time and he asks Saul, "What have you done?" He says that God, because of your actions, that God is not going to allow your kingdom, your family, to rule on the throne of Israel forever, but God's going to take the kingdom away from you. You see, God had commanded that there was a certain ways that offerings were made to him, and it was made by the priest. And so it was Samuel's role to make that offering. But Saul, out of his fear and out of his impatience, offered it himself. So he had obeyed or disobeyed God's commands. And so he faces these tough consequences that Samuel says God is going to take the kingdom away from you. So Saul at that moment, he acted out of fear rather than faith. That he let his fear control his choices and his actions, and it spilled out in some ugly ways in his life. Well, what can we learn from this story? I want to say first, it's okay to experience fear. I think that's something that God created us with the ability to feel fear and to feel anxiety at times. And that may be something that you're experiencing right now. But I think it is important when we are experiencing fear that we need to pay attention to the effect that fear has on us. We need to pay attention to the way it is shaping the words that come out of our mouth and the way that we're acting towards others and the choices that we're making. We need to be careful that it doesn't spill out of our lives in ugly ways. So rather than letting fear control us, whenever we do face fear, that's a moment that we should turn to God, that we should let our faith be bigger than our fear. So I want to encourage y'all this week to pay attention to your fear or anxiety that you're experiencing, and pay attention to the way that it affects the way that you're living and the way that you're acting. Be careful that it doesn't pour out of your life in ugly ways, but rather when you feel fearful, to lift those anxieties, to lift those fears up to God, and to try to place your trust in Him, and let your actions be driven by your faith rather than your fear. I like the verse in 2 Timothy 1, verse 7. Paul's writing to Timothy, and Timothy is this young church leader, someone who could be experiencing some fears, as sometimes it's hard to be a Jesus follower, and he faced different pressures from both outside and within the church that made being this minister at this church difficult. But Paul writes to him, he said, "For God did not give us a spirit of timidity," or in some versions it says a spirit of fear, but rather he gives us a spirit of power, of love, and of self-discipline. So I want to encourage you guys as I wrap up my lesson to not let fear control the way that you live. Because when fear controls us, it doesn't often lead to obedience. It doesn't often lead to Christ-like character. But rather, place your trust in God. Let His Spirit that lives inside of us, let it pour out of your lives, and let it shape your words and your actions and the choices you make. I hope you guys have a great week. I hope to see you tonight on the Zoom call. We'll talk to you later. Bye.